Just a few hours ago at around 1 o'clock Canberra time, US President Joe Biden delivered his first State of the Union address. It's a speech from the President given every 12 months to the assembled chamber of congressmen and women, senators, and a number of distinguished guests, more often than not, with mentions of them in the speech, all staged for the cameras. Now, in terms of content, unsurprisingly, President Biden had strong words for Vladimir Putin over the invasion of Ukraine.
But I want you to know we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. When the history of this era is written, Putin's war in Ukraine will have left Russia weaker and the rest of the world stronger.
But true to form, President Biden's speech wasn't without a couple of embarrassing gaffes, including this one where he appeared to confuse Ukraine with another country more than 3,000 kilometres away.
We stand with you. Putin may circle Kyiv with tanks, but he'll never gain the hearts and souls of the Iranian people.
All right, for his reaction, I want to bring in the Australian newspaper's Washington correspondent, Adam Crichton. He joins me now from DC. Adam, this was billed as a big reset speech to turn around Biden's struggling poll numbers. That was even before he was confronted with last week's a kick-off of hostilities in Ukraine. How did you rate it, but also how's it being received tonight in the US?
Well, firstly, Peter, I thought it was a bit of a failure, to be honest, quite a letdown. I was actually stunned that there was so little in the speech. I mean, as you said before, there was the lofty rhetoric about Russia, of course, that was expected, but that was really only a small minority of the speech, about 20% of the words of a 6,500 word speech. It was a very long speech. And on the domestic side of things, it was just the same old talk from last year. There was no new political direction. There was no using of this crisis to really seize the agenda in a new way. For instance, there was nothing new on energy prices. He just mentioned inflation kind of in passing, but there was no concrete steps on how the administration would get inflation down. There was a lot of talk about climate change and transgender rights, that sort of thing. But there was really nothing to shift the Democratic Party more towards the centre. And let's face it, the agenda of last year has been a failure. We have a president with the lowest approval rating of any president in modern history, except for Donald Trump. And even then, he's only slightly higher than Donald Trump. So I don't see how this is really going to shift the dial at all for the Democrats. I think it's been a huge disappointment.
Yeah, I have to say, I'll get to some of the more military commentary he had in the speech in a minute, but there was a lot of woke language. It felt to me, and particularly when they panned the crowd and you saw AOC and others stand up and cheer, it said to me that this was more about a speech to the Democratic Party constituency to try and get them back on behind Biden and Harris, Kamala Harris, more than a speech that was meant to reach out to Americans in their lounge rooms and get them to back their president.
Yes. Yeah, look, I think that's right. And I don't understand why, because he doesn't need to win a Democratic primary anymore. He's already done that. And look, let's be honest, he's not going to run for president again, most likely. So I don't know why he does that. I mean, he should be trying to leave his mark as a great president and a centrist and someone who the American people really love and respect. But as you say, he's still talking about these things that are not feasible. And just an example of something that he could have done, which would have been relatively easy on the foreign policy front, he could have put a ban on the importation of Russian oil into the US, which would have prompted some more domestic production. Right now, about 5 to 7% of the US oil imports come from Russia. And that would be something relatively easy to choke off. But he didn't even do that. There was only this ban on Russian flights in and out of the US, which you'd have to imagine is a fairly token ban, really, given there'd be very few of those flights in the first place. So on the foreign policy front, there wasn't much new. But then, as you suggest, the domestic front, there was nothing new either. There was this thing called a unity agenda for the nation, which was this hodgepodge of 4 different targets to help veterans, to help the victims of opioid addiction, and to improve mental health. But you know, those things are just no-brainers, which governments will be doing anyway. They aren't particularly exciting.
Look, to me, having worked for a leader, this was someone else's speech. Usually leaders own the language, they own the rhetoric, it sounds like them. I mean, whether you liked Obama's State of the Nation or not, or Trump's, there was the essence of the man in both of those oratory speeches. None of that today. I think he struggled with the auto cue. He miscued terms. There was the gaffe on Iran. He didn't sound confident of the material, but I think perhaps I'm most critical. Yes, he said he'd ban these private jets and super yachts, but he ruled out boots on the ground. Now, if Putin is out there with a nuclear threat in the mix, I just think it was wrong-headed today for the US to say boots on the ground are off.
Yeah, look, that's probably right. I mean, it's a very difficult situation for the US. There's a lot of questions about the mental health, I think, of Vladimir Putin now, which I think would worry the military hardheads here about just what he might be capable of. And so Biden stressed once again, as you suggested, that there'd be no boots on the ground in the US. And I think that that's their deliberate strategy from the US, not to inflame the situation anymore. But I can see your point. I mean, the sanctions so far that have been imposed have clearly not deterred Vladimir Putin. The missiles are still raining down. The tanks are approaching the cities. So nothing the West so far has done has stopped what what Putin is trying to do. But maybe there's no more the US can do. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud here. I mean, it's a very difficult situation, and look, I'm just not sure escalating it to a war with NATO would be necessarily wise.
No, I'm not suggesting they go that far, and of course this is not a NATO country, not a signatory to the NATO convention, but nonetheless, you don't deal with dictators by basically saying, look, we're not going to get involved, you've got a free rein, particularly when they're threatening nuclear retaliation. The only thing men like Putin understand is a strong West and a strong America, and you know, he's no Reagan, and that's the problem I think the
No,
world's
he's certainly
facing.
not. Yeah, look, you're quite right about the rhetoric too. It was rather embarrassing. I mean, surely this is a speech that he'd rehearsed, that he'd read over at least multiple times, and yet, you know, he was incapable of delivering it fluently. And this is a man who's been in politics for 50 years, basically. He's given so many speeches, and of course his apologists say he has a stutter, but I'm sorry, that's definitely not excuse enough. And if you watch old footage of Biden, he never had a stutter like this in the past. So it does raise questions about his cognitive ability, which are growing all the time, and we're only just after 1 year through the presidency. So I think these concerns are going to continue to grow. You mentioned the sanctions on the Russian oligarchs. I think that they're important to mention because they may have a more effect than many of these other sanctions. There's now hundreds of people on this list who are close to Putin. And the president said that the US and its allies would be going after their yachts, their houses, would be taking their kids out of Western schools and so forth. So perhaps this will have some effect in coming weeks.
Let's hope it does. Adam Crichton, appreciate your insights. Thank you.